If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. They'll never know.
It's the dark days of the off-season. I think I may have said something similar to that during the last episode, but now things are just getting really dark. It's everything is negative. We're not in the playoffs. So, I mean, any bad thing that can be discussed is being discussed. Any heartbreak that we've experienced and setting ourselves up, I guess, for disappointment by talking about free agents that we cannot afford and different stuff. It just really brings me down a little bit and gets me frustrated. And I try not to get frustrated about these types of things. So, Scott, we're gonna have to talk through this a little bit, maybe talk each other off some little ledges here and just have a good baseball conversation. I mean, I'm not saying it's all going to be positive, but going to be try to be as positive as possible. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? The World Series is getting ready to start. We're Pirates fans, so disappointment is our natural state. And as we get ready for the World Series, where the two number one seeds are going to face off, two of the biggest payrolls in baseball are going to face off, it certainly does not help with the disappointment that we're setting ourselves up for. The pessimism, I'm sure that we will continue to live in our baseball lives, but it's a World Series, so there's a level of celebration that is deserved.
I mean, I will watch it, and anybody that listened knows this is pretty much my worst case scenario where two of the highest payroll teams actually make it because we've discussed before. I believe it's going to take some of the big payroll teams becoming frustrated with giving away their revenue to somebody like the Guardians to take their title and take their money and everything that comes with being in the World Series, all the money that comes to the stadium, the town, everything like that. So this is pretty much the worst case scenario on that end of things. Baseball wise, I mean, you got Judge, you got Soto, you got Garrett Cole, you have Ohtani. I mean, you have Tommy Edman coming out of nowhere and becoming a hero, which happens a lot in baseball. And those stories are cool to see. Yamamoto, there is, star power worldwide across that. So in that way, it is a good thing. So maybe that's why I'm depressed. I mean, Pirates Twitter seems to be going like off the rails, like every time you look at it. Moves that are being made before we hopped on here, us hiring or supposedly, I mean, it hasn't been made official yet. Getting the vice president of research and development for the past 7 years from the said Guardians, who have, one of the best farm systems consistently, especially on the international market. There's even people like looking for the negatives in those types of things. It's just really weird to me just because if you're getting a guy who is coming from a place that has been successful in doing something and he is deciding to come and help out your team to become hopefully successful in the areas they've been successful in being able to develop, players from the international market. They've been a pitching factory before, just like the Pirates are right now, and are able to do more with less. I don't see how that's a negative.
Yeah, people are going to try to find the negative in everything. It's the world that we live in. It's the climate of civilization really that we're in right now. But people will ask, well, why would he do that? Why would you leave the Guardians, who had a deep postseason run, to come to the Pittsburgh Pirates? And the answer there can be as simple as maybe they pay him more money, maybe he wants a different challenge, a change of scenery. It's not always negativity. Maybe he wants to further himself. And so I just don't understand, instead of being excited that we have a guy that has a bit of a track record and that he can benefit the franchise as a whole, it's got to be, well, why would anybody want to come here?
And for me, like I went to the money thing automatically because why do most people change jobs? Even if you're happy at a job, it's if you are, compensated financially. And
Mhm.
that's the one thing that, the Pirates, nobody can kind of disparage them on is in research, development, the minor leagues, everything that would be with that. And people kind of laughed at Travis Williams when he said this, I believe it was at Pirates Fest last year, where they are one of the top spenders in like development. I mean, they have, a number of coaches on the minor league staffs. They've added, you know, game planning coaches in the minor leagues for their catchers. They added assistants for, Andy Haynes isn't here anymore, but they added an assistant for him. They added an assistant for Oscar Marine. So they do plug in money there. And, I've had this thought, and I'm pretty sure there's been a conversation on this show previously, is that if you're not able or willing, whatever it would be, to go out and spend money on players, then where else can you put that money in? If you're going to get I'm just going to spitball, say a research and development guy who makes $250,000 a year, or go sign a $4 million free agent that you're not sure is going to work out, the money maybe is better invested in that type of position. And that's where, like, I mean, I think that the conversation came from when John Nunnally got fired last year, or I think it was prior to him getting fired, saying, "Well, just come have him be a coach at the major league level. Why not have like six hitting coaches and guys that can work with other different players and stuff? Because paying him a couple $100,000 a year may be more of a benefit, like I said, than bringing in a big name free agent."
Get a better return on the money you're paying somebody like Key Brian Hayes. But yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is such a huge pet peeve of mine. And it's not going to be popular on pirate social media because the focus is always on the payroll. And it's almost like that is the only expenditure that a baseball franchise has. And I think it gets so much gets lost because we focus on the payroll. And yes, it is an important part, and you're seeing it because two of the highest payroll teams are in the World Series, and what three of the four teams that were left standing were big payroll teams. But smaller market teams can be successful, and it just goes to show that it doesn't always have to be in the payroll. The Dominican Academy, the coaches, like you talked about, analytics. They spend a bunch of money on the analytics, and the department is huge. And looking for those edges wherever they can get them, and it's just all the focus that ever gets brought to the table is they're not spending enough on players. But that doesn't mean that they're not spending money to make the team better. Because, like you said, if you pay a guy an extra 100 grand to bring out one war better out of a superstar player or any kind of player that you have, if you can pay somebody $150,000 and they figure out Jack Sawinski and what can get him back to what we thought he could be, the benefits to your team outweigh that money that you're spending. You just have to spend smarter.
Yeah, and that's what we were. I mean, I'll tell everybody. We'll pull back the curtain a little bit, as we pretty much had almost a full episode, kind of before we jumped on here. Not a full episode, but pretty close to it,
Yeah, yeah.
of spending that money smart. And a lot of the times, with the conversations that are going on around Pirates Twitter right now, you have, people throwing out who they would want, to get as a free agent and what they would be willing to spend on that free agent. And to me, like, some of those conversations are kind of fun because, I mean, as baseball fans, there are players that we would want to come to our team, ones that we think, would be able to fill a hole, fill a gap wherever it may be. But then, I mean, we're almost assuming that that player will then come in and perform up to the expectation that we set for them. An example, that I give is if you had a player that was producing between 2 and 3 WAR for 3 seasons in a row, and you bring him in at $15 million a year, and you bring him in at $75 million. So you've got this player and you're expecting, what are you expecting from him? Well, the past 2 or 3 seasons, he's put up, 2 to 3 WAR. So I would be looking at 2 to 3 WAR from that player. And then he comes in and for the next 2 years, he puts up .6 WAR and then -2 WAR on the season to the point where fans, podcasts, media members, whoever it would be screaming that this guy shouldn't even be starting on your team. And that player is Andrew Benintendi. And for me, like, when the White Sox signed that contract, and everybody knows, full disclosure at this point in time, Chris, former co-host, has a White Sox podcast. My wife is a White Sox fan. My brother-in-law is probably the biggest White Sox fan I've ever met in my life and have had millions of conversations around these types of things. That was, to the fans, to the media, to everybody, was a really good signing, like a legitimate, really good signing. And in the end, it did not work out for that team. So I think that, like, we as fans have this expectation that if this money is spent, and once again, I'm not going to go and say they should not spend money on a player, that they should, be like all cutesy and really smart to do all this kind of stuff. But that's just also not what goes into all of this. You can go out and spend that money, but it doesn't automatically guarantee that you are going to get the return on that money that you expect.
Yeah, I mean, you go out and let's just say the unthinkable happens and they sign Cody Bellinger, and you're expecting bounce back Cody Bellinger, but you're getting end of Dodgers run Cody, and you threw all this money there, and the Pirates aren't going to be able to paper over that like teams like the Dodgers and Yankees and all those high big market teams can do. They can eat their mistakes. I think we talked last week about how much money the Mets are paying to players to not play for them and how that inflates their number. The Pirates do not have that luxury. And so the bigger the contract, the more risk. And it would be hailed on day one of the contract signing as a great move. And the Pirates are turning the corner. And this is a new era for Pirates baseball. And then the time comes to be on the field and actually play the game. And they stumble, they get hurt, they don't perform. And where are you at there? You've set your franchise and your rebuild back a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that I brought up to you, I mean, just another example of this was, I mean, last offseason, there were people absolutely, and I always use this reference because it makes me laugh about Neil Huntington, and people were saying people were beating the table for certain players that didn't end up performing well, where there were fans and podcast writers, whoever it may be, out there beating the table for the Pirates to sign a specific first baseman who ended up signing for what turns out to be, it would be a 1-year contract worth $16 million if he would opt out as a player, or it could work its way up to being 3 years for, I believe, around $48 million. And that's Rhys Hoskins. And it wasn't like I was against the signing. And if the Pirates would have signed him, I mean, obviously, as a fan, I would have been excited about a player that, had put up some pretty good seasons. I looked back, the last season he played he put up like 2 WAR, was off for a year, and you would be hoping that, he could get that back going and you'd get like that 2 WAR back again. But he put up negative point 3 B WAR for this season. Everybody will look at the home run total and be like, well, he hit 26 home runs. I'm like, well, not Edward Olivares, Brian De La Cruz hit 21.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So like it's not always just like that one number. I mean, we do need that power. We talked about that before. But and it's not saying that, the signing of Hoskins would have turned out the same for the Pirates. There's no way of knowing, but it's just weird how those things kind of come to be where it's like, yeah, it's really not that easy to build a team. Like this is not, and I've said it a million times, it's not MLB the Show.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be able to bring in Reese Hoskins and then control him as your player and he's going to hit 50 bombs. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's kind of fun to think about those types of signings and stuff. And yeah, people will come back at me and say, well, Rowdy Tellez didn't work out either. No, he
But how much did you
didn't.
pay Rowdy? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you paid him $3.2 million to come in here with the hope that he could be, you know, 1 WAR or 1.5 or 2 WAR Rowdy Tellez, and that didn't work out. But imagine if the Pirates had put out, well, if I'm Hoskins, I'm opted into that next one for $18
Absolutely.
million. So then at that point in time, you're putting out $30 million over 2 years. And, he could have a bounce back year next year, a year off of injury,
Hmm.
but that's not guaranteed. So right now, you're paying $30 million and a team like the Pirates, and believe me, I mean a team like the Brewers that could come back to haunt them.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine if they had made that signing. Imagine if the Pirates had done a contract with an opt out. I mean, there would be people calling even more strongly for Charrington's job. They would be saying, "Oh, you can't do that in a market like Pittsburgh. You can't sign. You can't give all the power to the player like that." And like you're saying, I mean, it's fun to armchair quarterback these things, but how many people were so angry that the Brewers got Gary Sanchez and the Pirates quote unquote settled for Yasmani Grandal? It is hard to build a team, and it's hard. You hear it in all the commercials for investment portfolio companies. Past results are not indicative of future earnings. Just because something has done well in the past does not mean that it's going to be a guarantee to continue or improve going forward. We talk about it, these guys are people. There's things going on in their lives we just can't predict. They are not a video game character, like you said. It's not MVP baseball '05 where I hit 100 plus home runs with Joe Mauer. It's just not reality, and they're not infallible on the field. And yeah, building teams and the money part of it, you just don't know. And that's why it is so smart for people and the organizations and the Pirates circumstances to go for these players that do not present as high of a risk. And money wise, investment wise, yeah, so you do get a Rowdy Tellez for a few $1 million. And in the grand scheme of things, if he doesn't perform, oh well, we tried. We looked at some analytics that said that he could perform, and he just didn't do it on the field. They have to take those chances, and I'm sure that when we look at the available free agents for this offseason, that they're not going to go and get obviously a Soto or probably not even like a Goldschmidt or an Alonso, guys like that. Um, they're gonna be more in that middle ground, just hoping for a bargain, and that's why you continue to get players in 1 year contracts, show me contracts. It's just too big of a risk for them to sign a potential big name player for long term and risk that much. I mean, Nutting is a newspaper guy. I'm sure he's not doing big wheeling and dealing stuff in the newspaper business right now. He's just risk averse.
Yeah, and this all kind of like took me back to the conversation I had with David Sampson. For anybody that hasn't, go back and listen to that. Where
Absolutely.
I was kind of like, in some ways, like praising what the Royals had done. To a degree, I always believe that you know the way that Bobby Witt Jr., the way that Vinny Pasquantino, the way that Sal Perez, his career came rejuvenated, had a lot to do with it as well. But it was the signings of Lugo and Waka, which I mean was what ended up in some ways helping them get to that point. Well, they signed two guys, didn't give them a ton of money. I mean, I know with Lugo they gave a little bit of length on that deal, but basically those guys came out and balled out and had career years. I mean, they had years where they performed, especially with Waka, a little bit old, like he hadn't performed in like 4 or 5 years. They came out and had career years. And that's why those signings look so good.
Hmm.
Now, it's not poo pooing, either of those players or poo pooing the Royals for what they did. It's just realizing with these, smaller revenue, smaller spending teams like the lower payrolls, that you have to hit on these types of players and you have to basically hope for them to perform like they've never performed before or revert back to how they performed 3 to 4 years ago for them to be able to be successful at times. Just like, I mean, I know that as Pirates fans, we always go back to, the last time the team was successful and we go back to, and we want them to like kind of run that playbook back again. We want them to go out and get their AJ Burnett, to make the Marlon Bird trade, towards the end of the season. We want, that magic again. I want that magic again. And everybody says, and I think I was on a podcast, I would, I listened to way too much. And the way my brain works, I can't remember exactly which one I heard it on. It's like, like how well Russell Martin performed. And I just gonna be a little bit cheating because I asked you this question beforehand because it was on my mind. But looking back on it, Russell Martin, baseball reference war, 2014 was a 4.7 war player. He was a 5.1 in 2025. And I asked you, and I could see the shock in your eyes when I asked, and I told you the answer, what he was in the 3 previous years for the Yankees. And it was around a 2 war player. And the year before we got him, he was a 1.8 war player. So, yes, in the end, that signing looks amazing. 2 years, $22 million. But at the time, you're giving him $6 million and hoping that he produces that 2 war season. And if he produces like he did, it's a whole new ball game and it's a whole new team. And we saw what happened in 14 and 15. And it was based upon this signing that was actually a fairly low risk signing. And Russell Martin played out his mind and played better than he ever had in his career before and better than he ever did after that, because I'm pretty sure the Blue Jays signed him to a pretty big deal,
Yeah.
got a pretty okay season out of him the next year. And then after that, I mean, he's pretty much playing his way out of baseball.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to win on those and you got to have guys that string together. You can't go 0 for 3 with Michael Taylor, Edward Olivares, and Rowdy Tellez. Think about if even one of those guys plays to their career best, what a different season it is entirely. So that's what they are paying these analytic department players for, and their new VP. Once that's reported and everything, that's where he's going to make his money. I think the Athletic did an article about trade candidates for different teams and landing spots, and one of the people that they brought up as a potential fit in Pittsburgh would be Spencer Torkelson. And so if we go and the change of scenery helps him and he becomes the guy that they've talked about him potentially being, and oh wow, geniuses. You know, you go from zero to hero real quick, and it's easy enough to do in reverse, hero to zero, if a guy stumbles and doesn't adjust well, especially when you're paying these guys 1 year deals. Hey, if Rowdy gets signed to a 3 year contract, as crazy as that sounds, and he has one bad year but then puts it together, he could bounce back and have a great year next year somewhere else, and it was in him. But that's the combination. They're trying to catch lightning in a bottle, and it gets harder to do when you have a shorter time frame.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about it a million times before that if certain things break different ways, if David Bednar doesn't have his worst season as a pro and just has his normal, and I hate to say it like that way, but like normal all-star seasons,
Mhm.
everybody knows, it's well documented by me that he did have his ups and downs during those seasons, but ended up putting together, really fine seasons for a reliever. If he just has one of those seasons, as opposed to the season that he has. You, to me, named, Jack Swinski has a season. You brought up Edward Olivares. I said to you, Edward Olivares was a 1.3 WAR player and just over 300 at bats for the Kansas City Royals. If he is even that, as opposed to a negative WAR player, and you had a couple wins there, Jack Swinski is status quo as
Yeah.
opposed to what he was. Brian Hayes stays healthy. I mean, that's like how razor thin this margin is for teams that, yes, I believe that some of it is choosing not to spend to a certain level. I always believe the payroll is too low.
Hmm.
Um, but I also am on the same thing. I don't know what's that thing. Is it Occam's razor? I always try to pretend to be smart from time to time, but it's just basically like, yes, I would like them to spend and $10 million, say, on payroll, but that $110 million isn't automatically going to guarantee that this thing gets pushed over the finish line.
Yeah.
We could end up with a worse season than we had previously. And I go back to, I hate to say it, a team like the White Sox, who went from, making the playoffs to being, I believe it was 81-81 when they made that signing of Benintendi. A lot of stuff doesn't go their way. There's injuries, there's different stuff like that. And within 2 years, they go from a team in the middle of a successful, or what is being viewed as a successful rebuild, to the worst team in the history of Major League Baseball. That's how thin it is. And their owner is richer than our owner, and he chooses to spend like he's poor a lot of the times. But even when they did spend, their payroll was up upwards of, I believe, 175 or 180 million dollars at one point in time, and it still wasn't enough. And now they're back down, and it's square one again.
Yeah. And then you see teams like the Tigers that, when you actually look at what they're paying guys that are actually on the field and how much those guys are making, I just don't like Javi Baez. It just never will like him. So the fact that they made the run without him just makes me extra happy. But yeah, it's just the you spend money. I think once the foundation is there, once you have the solid core, you don't want to get ahead of yourself and start spending like crazy, because and I'm going to defend Nutting here, but Bob Nutting did spend money when the team warranted it. During the last playoff run, they went over $100 million on payroll. So he spent the money when it was there to take that team to the next level. And yes, granted, we all think that he could have gone a little bit farther. And there's that's a discussion to have about why that didn't come together. But um, he has shown via a track record and through his actions that when the team warrants it, the money will be spent. And I guess maybe that's just the optimist in me that hopefully we're getting closer. And this offseason will be the one to do it because the team is getting better. I know that we've talked about this before too, but Charrington saying that the improvement is being shown there because, to your point, and like we've talked before, if Bednar doesn't have the losses that he has, like you mentioned, but also the position that he was in, where he was not the go-to guy. If he's having his normal season, he is the go-to guy, and the rest of the bullpen is not put in a position to blow some more of those games. So even though he had the number of losses that he had, it could be said that the circumstances that his struggling created cost them more games. You're putting guys out there in the eighth and ninth that had no business being there. And, we were close enough and competing deep enough into the season that every game mattered. And we saw that with that 10-game losing streak and how much that hurt us and put us out of contention completely. That even changing 4 or 5 different games in the course of 162 is a completely different season, and we're going into an off season with completely different feelings and thoughts and discussion points. I feel ranty this week. I feel like I've been doing a lot of ranting.
No, it's a good thing, man. I was just enamored by the rant, and I was enjoying the rant because it's all spot on. Because I mean, and that's the frustrating part. I feel like that's why everybody. I mean, man, you're getting angsty, and you're usually the most calm, cool, collected dude I've ever talked to about stuff. It just gets frustrating because you want to see what's going to happen, get through the World Series, get to the offseason, see what is going to be done. But then ultimately, just kind of like we talked about this entire time, is that even if a move doesn't look great, on paper or what we deem to be on paper, or maybe being the cheap way out or something, it's not saying that it's not going to work out. I mean, we've seen it happen, and it's on a smaller scale within the past 2 years. And we've talked about this already with, Ryan Baracki and Dennis Santana and the way they were able to perform for even just parts of a season. And, without them, there may be a couple, more losses in there. Who knows?
Mhm.
But that's where, like, I mean, I guess I have that optimism too, is that if you can find one or two of those guys, not, just in the bullpen, but at other positions that you can kind of bring the best out in, and they can become, some of the better performers, then that's where that little edge is at. That's where that, the eye of the needle. I will keep on saying that we have to, there's a small window that we have to go through, and everything has to break our way for that to equal even 2023, 2024, and 2025, because there was a lot of stuff. I mean, you did have an MVP candidate in Andrew McCutchen, but within the supporting cast, there was a lot of things that broke our way.
Pedro. Maybe Johan Ramirez will be that next bullpen piece.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say